how much variation does one need in their exercise and fitness routine? Welcome to episode 50 of the formerly titled podcast, Coach's Corner with Justin and Ethan, but we're going to do something different for 2025. Coach's Corner with Justin and Ethan was always kind of like a placeholder for our show, but we decided to rename, and we're going to be calling this show from here on out In the Grand Scheme of Fitness. So this title will be In the Grand Scheme of Fitness with Justin and Ethan. And the reason why we did this, I think, is because it tends to be that we talk a lot of our own personal anecdotes and just trying to distill down some of the complexities of exercise and fitness and just a better lifestyle in general down to like just its basics.
Yeah, trim that fat.
Exactly. And so anyway, so I feel like In the Grand Scheme of Fitness is an appropriate new name for what we are doing here. But today, folks, we're going to be talking about how much variation does one need in their exercise and fitness routine. Remember when we opened up a CrossFit gym in 2013, it was all about like constantly varied
Functional
movements. You know, and there is a movement, and there still is a huge cohort of people who live and breathe this. But I think it's like now that's all kind of settled and consolidated, and it's all evened out. We realize like, you know, there is a downside to too much variation in your training.
Absolutely.
And in fact, progressive overload is almost the antithesis of variation in a lot of ways.
In some capacity. And I think even within the CrossFit realm, I realized that there was still a library of movements that primarily everything was built off of. Those movements
like
might have been
foundational movements.
The 9 foundational movements. And depending on what gym you went to and what they chose to include, but even then, it's like those movements were varied in their weight, rep scheme, but it was almost always some form of squatting, pressing, pulling.
Right.
And so even there was still a little hopper basket of movements that were returned to over and over again.
Yeah.
You know.
And I think and then, you know, just continuing on like the CrossFit tip, that if you were a good gym and you actually programmed your workouts, then you could take those 9 foundational movements, your shoulder press, your back squat, your deadlift, your front squat, your clean and jerk, all the 9 foundational movements of CrossFit, and you can create progression.
Absolutely.
You know, if like what we used to do is we would do like monthly cycles. So this month it's like squat progressions. The next month would be bench press progressions. We would still be doing all the different stuff. It's just the first half of the class was always like some sort of a strength progression. But a lot of gyms don't do that. Not even just CrossFit gyms. You know, we're talking like just your typical morning boot camp class, or just people who just don't really understand fitness and exercise science. They're just like, they just kind of go to the gym and they're like, oh yeah, I don't know. Yesterday I did this, so I guess today I'll do this.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just every time you go, it's just something different.
Yep.
And listen, better than nothing.
Yeah.
But you know, if the goal is to improve, which it likely is, then I think the variation can have a double-edged sword in a way.
Absolutely. And without question, I think variability offers kind of novelty, and novelty is something that can ask the body to change. So without question, if you've only done the same bench press routine rep scheme for 5 years, there's going to become a plateau of, you know, your adaptations to it, because as Arnold used to say, your body knows what's coming.
Your muscles
know. You're going to warm up with 135 and
then you're going
to do it to 225. And so I think there is some truth to that, but to your point, it is a double-edged sword without the opportunity for your body to dive into the adaptations, which is, again, like you said, progressive overload, just repeating the thing, seeing improvements, repeating within those new improvements, then you kind of are missing out on a lot. I know for me, in times of my life, that when I was not training with the program and doing a bunch of cool stuff and definitely being fit, that when I would commit to a program, even if it included novel movements, but just continued to do the same thing and got better at those things, that I would see much faster progress.
For sure. I think that like if you're just starting out with fitness, like there's almost like a badge of honor for like, I do something different every time I go to a gym. I remember I used to have a client back in the day when I was doing a lot of in-person stuff, and he would brag about me as his trainer because he's like, man, I've been coming here for a year, and every time I see you, we do something different. And he thought that was there. He found value in that, right? And at the time, I wasn't that great anyways as a trainer. I was just like, yeah, look at my repertoire, you know, like,
right. Like I got all the tricks.
But then, you know, as I got smarter and older, I was like, ooh, that's not a good thing. That just means I was making shit up as we go, just making up random ass movements that actually had no impact on his fitness. It was just killing time. Yeah. But he didn't know any better, and so it was like a perfect combo because he didn't none the wiser, and it just made me look good. But you know, now it's like, you know, I think if you're new at fitness, you can misperceive value in variation.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But then if you are serious about it, you need to hunker down with a cluster of exercises, a group of exercises, and just do them for 6 to 8 weeks with the focus on adding more weight, adding more reps, or adding more sets each week.
Or just even increasing your movement quality.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, but just some form of improvement, increasing your range of motion in a squat, or just increasing.
Yeah, that's progression for sure.
Yeah, just any type of progression. And I think that even if you include a variation in your training protocol, that the thing is you have to repeat it. You have to, if you want to do agility drills, if we're going to use that example that we were talking about, or if you want to incorporate a particular kind of mobility work, you know, doing FRC and cars and rails and pails and all those things that they coined.
You guys all know what that means.
Of course, sure, yeah. But just all these like very knick-knack, paddywhack mobility things. I just think no matter what it is, that having a roadmap, starting in an appropriate place, and repeating that exercise. So even if it is something new, like even if you were like, I want to learn to sprint, and you start sprinting with a trainer and they're teaching you how to sprint, like to just do sprint work for one workout isn't going to really have the benefit. Whereas if you had that goal in mind for just, you were curious, or you have, for whatever reason, to then spend some type of time where you repeat the exercises, repeat the form, actually learn it, and doing it in a way that's both safe and then gives you the actual benefit of the repeated, you know, interaction with it.
And I think that like one concept that I kind of had an epiphany on when we used to own the gym is variety doesn't mean random. And I think that it can be misunderstood as just like random, just like the hopper wheel kind of idea. Just like we're just going to pull something out of the hopper and just, it's this workout today. Yeah. It doesn't need to be that way. Variety can be intentional. Yeah. And variation can be intentional. And so a good example would be like, okay, let's just say we're doing a strength training routine, and there's like the core movement of, let's just say, a bench press, just for simple analogy, where every week we're gonna do 4 sets of bench press, and we're gonna either every single week we're gonna either increase reps or we're gonna increase the weight, but we're doing 4 sets of bench press every Monday for 8 weeks. Okay, so that's like the starting point. Not a lot of variation there. Yep. However, what we could do then is each week there's a burnout superset of a different chest exercise after the 4 sets. And that could be your intentional variation. So for example, week 1, we do our 4 sets of bench press, and then we just do as many push-ups as we can do in a minute afterwards, like a finisher. Then week 2, then we just do, 30 cable flies afterwards as a finisher. Then week 3, it's so there could be like supplemental accessory work that's like a finisher to your core that could create some variation, but it's intentional. Yeah,
100%. And so I think pre-fatigue and the same idea, right? Like pre-fatigue your triceps so that when you get to the bench, they're wiped out.
Especially if you have shoulder issues, that's a great
come into play more or something. So yeah, and I think variation is it. But to the example, should we tell the story that sparked this?
Yeah, for sure. So like one of Tanya's friends, Tanya's my wife, she goes to a boot camp in the morning, and for her that just makes sense, like a 6 a.m. kind of just a classic, just calisthenics, do a bunch of huffing and puffing, lightweight, submaximal, high rep stuff. But it's fitness and it's boot camp, and I'm all listen, like we've talked about a million times in this show, anything's better than nothing. I'm 100%. All for movement. If that gets you going and you can be consistent with it, we're all going to live to be super healthy, a long healthy life if you can just commit to something. Anyways, whatever. But the boot camp, every morning's a different teacher. Some teachers are better than others. Yeah. And there's this one lady in particular who just clearly is just like just has no real concept of, what's going on. And she had them do at the end of the workout as the finisher.
And that's the finisher too.
Like a minute of lateral jumps over a kettlebell. So you put the kettlebell up. So it's 8 inches off the ground.
At least 10 inches, yeah.
And so these are just regular people. These aren't athletes. They're not training for something in particular. Yeah, they're just there to just be healthy.
They could be out of shape. This could be their first class.
So yeah,
have some extra weight on them.
You have the range of fitness is all over the place. And so she had them do a lateral jump for a minute over the kettlebell. Guess what? Like this girl hit the kettlebell, fell and like twisted her ankle. Now she's out for a week,
At least, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's really kind of what inspired this new name change for the show, because what I was explaining to Tanya, I was like, listen, in the grand scheme of fitness, that lateral jump means nothing. Like it doesn't, it's the whatever marginal benefit you're going to get, like agility wise or athletic wise, means like it's not worth the risk of having like Susie Q accountant who works out twice a week, her legs are like cinder blocks because she just did squats for an hour, now try to do lateral jumps over an 8-inch cut. Like that's just so stupid.
Right. And it's like, what's the intent? Is it like a cardiovascular like HIIT training style? Like what, if the intent is to just burn out the engine at the end of the workout, you could have people do mountain climbers and like quarter jump squats,
high knees.
Yeah. And do things that would be much less risk oriented, but then achieve the same success. And so if it's not about being agile, which let me tell you, lateral hops over an object is quite a movement
for sure.
And especially for a minute straight repeatedly.
After a whole hour of lunges and squats and deadlifts.
A lot. And so maybe that's why she was like, oh, that's going to be a lot. This will get them. But there's lots of ways to do a lot. And I think if the intent is to just, because even I understand there's kind of like a psycho-emotional aspect to like a burnout at the end of a workout.
For sure, yeah. You feel there's like a cathartic moment.
You do a strength training and all of a sudden your heart rate's puffing. You're like, oh, why did I do that? I feel great. I mean, even with my clients today, we're breaking down some movement qualities and really kind of diving into form, and time was kind of taken away. And at the end of the workout, I was like, all right, you guys are going to do like an I go, you go, some slam balls.
Great.
Get their heart rate up, get the benefit of an elevated heart rate, get that like little satisfaction. Take a few minutes to do that, but
that's smart though, because think about it. Like I go, you go. It's like that's classic interval training. Yeah, and it's just so much better because there is a strength fatigue ratio we have to manage.
Absolutely.
And if it's all just fatigue, then form and strength just plummets, and you look like a wet noodle. Yeah. And then injuries coming up next, and so it's like,
well, especially the movement of a slam ball to me is a very effective movement where you can output as much as you want. You can throw that ball as hard as you want, but fundamentally it's a very safe movement.
Right.
It uses the whole body, but it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of risk involved, and so
and it's like I go, you go means that like, okay, you do 20 reps, that means I get to rest for 20-30 seconds. Not a huge rest, heart rate still elevated, but just enough to sort of like rebalance that strength fatigue rate, stimulus fatigue ratio. So when you do go now, you can actually go harder with better form. And that's the skill set that is going to benefit you long term versus just destroying yourself by going like a minute straight. And by the last 15 seconds, you look like a train wreck because your body is just so systemically fatigued. There's no control.
I mean, if I were to do that, that would just be crushing at the end of a workout. And it's to the point of the risk of using that movement alone, which I think most people's ankles and like just leg chains aren't adapted
for that. No, the plyometrics sort of springing up over that.
The plyometrics are extremely demanding. Like, so, there's supposed to always be an order in which you do exercises in the textbook fashion of things. And the general idea is that you always start with like the biggest, most intense movements first. So if you had deadlifts in a workout, you wouldn't do all your hamstring curls and your accessory work before the deadlift because your nervous system is going to be fatigued and all that kind of an idea. And so in the classic textbook sense, you start with the biggest, most demanding movements. and you move in. If you would do generally, unless there's other way, you do your pull-ups and your back work before your bicep work. In a general idea, that's the general idea. And I think especially more towards athletic training and with athletes.
Yeah,
and
if you're not going for aesthetics, if it's just performance and output, that makes sense.
And so plyometrics was always put first. You do a warm-up because plyometrics are so demanding. They are complete power output. They are so demanding on the joints and the tissues that you would never do them in a fatigue state.
So you wouldn't do squats and jump lunges for an hour and then finish everybody off with 90 seconds of lateral jumps over a kettlebell?
Only if you're running the best boot camp around.
Yeah, right.
And so I think it is like, so I think what we're kind of trying to get at with this is that, and I think it could even be applied to diet, is that variability and or randomness is can be the shiny apple or the shiny coin, like so many things we've talked about. And that there's a time and a place for variability, there's a time and a place for pursuing new movements and new modalities, but that just chucking a deck of cards on the floor and ace of spades came up, we're doing this today, kind of an idea isn't necessarily going to be of benefit. And that what it really comes down to is being consistent fundamentally. Right. And in this capacity, I think being consistent, one, with certain exercises so that you get the benefit of them, you get the adaptation, you get to live out of that adaptation and climb the ladder, but also just consistency in your ability to work out and show up. And in this case, this ankle injury, depending on how severe it is, might be 3 weeks. Especially
a boot camp situation. Like if you can't, like it's not like you're doing a strength training routine where if you rolled your ankle, you can work around it and just, I mean, you're just showing up to a boot camp where you don't really have much, say in the matter. If your ankle's all fucked up, you're out, that's it for a week or two, and so on the one end of the spectrum, we have like constantly varied random stuff like we just talked about. On the other end of the spectrum, we have what we would call like just the law of accommodation, where you've only ever done the exact same workout over and over again, and your body is actually so accommodated and adapted to that you actually start to decline your fitness. So a good example of that end of the spectrum would be like you run a 1 mile every morning. So it's like you're like in the beginning, that mile destroys you. Your ankles and calves are sore for a week. You're out of breath. You can't even run the mile. You have to stop like 5 times. After a month, you're running it no problem. After a year, it's just like barely even out of breath now. And then what ends up happening is a law of accommodation says that we actually start to become less fit. We've adapted so much to the one thing that we've done that we actually can start to lose fitness and gain body fat again and sort of decline, even though we are moving. So I think we want to avoid both extremes. Like, don't just get stuck in the same exact bench press routine that you've only ever done 135 pound bench press for 3 sets of 10. That's all you've ever done for your chest. It's like, actually the law of accommodation would state that you'll actually start to decline after your body acclimates. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the constantly varied, always random, which has its own risks. If I were to choose, I'd say probably the constantly varied, always random one would probably be better. But I think that the answer is probably just backing off into the middle somewhere, where like, as usual, you take 6 to 8 weeks, you pick your exercises, you create your program essentially, and then in that chunk of time, 6 to 8 weeks, every single week, you're trying to progress, like we talked about earlier, adding more weight, adding more reps, adding more sets, more range of motion, like whatever the progression objective is. And then after the 6 or 8 weeks are over, you re-scramble, rearrange new exercises, new modalities, new sets, new rep ranges, all the good stuff, and you create another 6 to 8 week mesocycle, and then you progress with that. And if you want to put on muscle and you want to get stronger and you want to just connect with your body and create that mind muscle connection, don't bounce around so much. Hunker down with a set of exercises that you can progress on for that 6 to 8 week period, and then just create some variety after that. But think of variety more of a mesocycle of like 6 to 8 weeks versus a daily cycle.
Absolutely. And it's also, I think, true of like, it's not to say that circuit training, which I would put most boot camps into some form of circuit training. I think circuit training is a perfectly fine workout, but then the exercise selection within I think still has to have some type of like sound methodology in there.
Yeah.
You know, and to just avoid injury, which I think is probably one of the biggest things to think about when exercising, especially if you're new or you're not necessarily a hyper committed individual, is just something to really consider, because I know it's like when I get an injury, it's the worst. And then they stick with you. They live inside of you forever. Just waiting, lurking to come back. And I think just that it's not to say that boot camps are bad, but that just doing a completely random exercise with potential high risks within them at every time is just not necessarily worth it. And then that person could have maybe just done 10,000 steps that day, and it might have been a better thing, especially not coming away with an injury.
And I think that like also if you are a person that you're not quite at a place where you want to like do your own programming and you still want to defer to like a coach, like a class, like I agree. There are some really wonderful classes, but also just like be okay with saying no to certain things. Like I tell Tanya all the time, I'm like, she tweaked her back because they had her in a V sit where she was kind of balancing her tailbones with one of those like Viper tubes overhead.
Oh yeah,
going like lateral like in a V. And so guess what? She like tweaked her lower back, and I was like, you know, babe, like just tell them no. Just say, hey, not going to do that. Like, you know, keep it close. Do something a little bit more like sustainable, but being okay to just say, hey, this one kind of makes me feel a little strange. I'd rather just like do lateral jumps on the ground without anything underneath my feet. But
well, that's just so interesting, because like that sounds like a badass move if you were fit enough to do it in a way. And I think that's one of the pitfalls, is that in these kind of randomized situations, these boot camps and these classes, is that there's this perception of the craziest, gnarliest, hardest thing is the best thing. And in some capacities, there's a part of my brain that says, well, like, yes, if you are capable, you are super fit, doing really badass, gnarly, crazy movements could make you super badass and gnarly in a physical sense. If you are ready for it, if you are kinesthetically and your movement quality is good, you know yourself well, and you're ready for that kind of thing. But at the same time, most people don't need that. Most people aren't going to benefit from that. And I think it's like that's kind of what I think we're really trying to get at, is like doing this crazy badass calisthenic exercise you saw online of benefit, maybe, depending on who you are. Could it make you like a super beast? Maybe, depending on where you are on your journey.
Will you have osteoarthritis in your late 30s? Probably.
You know, maybe, you know, maybe, but I think it just depends on that. In the grand scheme of fitness, most of that isn't necessary. And for some people, it might be their path, but I think those people are going to be the exception, not the rule. And I think those individuals that are in a place that are capable and going to benefit from those exercises are probably the people that are thinking of them or coming up with them, and they will know it, versus kind of being in a kind of a receiving end from coaching and just being asked to do things that are really intense and extreme for the perceived notion that they're really hard and therefore really beneficial. When most of the time, I don't want to say it again. I was almost going to say it again. In the grand scheme of things, it's just really not the case. And I think that's the idea that I think we're trying to drive home.
When we look at like barring athletes, because we see on Instagram, we'll see a reel of like a football player like doing these crazy agility drills. That is his life. That is 4 or 5 hours a day. That's all they do. But for most folks who like have a day job and work out for an hour 3 times a week, like don't try to do these crazy plyometric, explosive exercises. You're just gonna fucking hurt yourself.
I mean, most people see on Instagram, even if they're not like a paid athlete or an athlete in the sense that they dedicate their life to what they're doing, and you're seeing kind of this upper echelon, high percentile expression of what the body can do because of their dedication to it. And that, like you said, most people are working out a few hours a week, not 3 hours a day every day for 17 years.
You know, and also like, you know, most people at a super high level, it's pretty much the same basic routine with slight variations to it. So when we see a clip of a football player or whatever doing this like crazy agility plyometric drill, they probably do that same drill every single day. And they progress by like shaving off fractions of seconds on that drill, and that is their progression. And so then we see it, we try to emulate it without having done it. And we haven't been doing
it since high school.
You know? And so it's like, just keep in mind that like progression kind of is almost every strength and performance coach's objective. And so for most people, that might just look like adding some sets or reps to your strength training routine in the gym. And then on the highest level, like a top tier athlete, that might be the same breaststroke, the same agility drill, the same ladder drills, but just timing it and trying to just shave off 1/10 of a second, because that is their progression.
Rotating their thumb a few degrees earlier, these crazy minute changes.
And so it's like, keep that in perspective and look at it like whatever marginal benefit we think that this like crazy routine of all this variation may have, A, means nothing if we're not consistent, because that's what most people struggle with, and B, means nothing if we end up getting injured from it. Because if you're over 30, man, injury prevention is the number one objective.
Number one. I mean,
because if you tweak that shoulder, you're battling that tweaked shoulder for months.
It's crazy how long. I was just demoing a Jefferson curl, which is basically like a forward folding stretch with a little bit of weight, kind of like a hamstring stretch with weight. And I was cold, and like, it's not, I wouldn't call it an injury, and it wasn't even a heavy weight, but like, there's just like one muscle in my back. I was like, nah, bro, I'm not down. And it wasn't like I was taken out. I didn't throw my back out, but it's just the fragility.
Because now you might still be able to work your legs out for the next couple of weeks, but you're going to have to really tone it down.
It's just,
so you don't
just amazing.
Tweak it. And so then that just you think about over the course of a year, how much that sets you back in your progressions. Like I was saying, like I had the knee injury from volleyball, and then I had another knee injury from jiu-jitsu the following year. So there was a solid year that my right knee, the same knee, had sustained back-to-back injuries that lasted an entire year. And so I was barely doing air squats and body weight lunges for almost a year. I couldn't even really handle any weight. And now that I'm not doing any like impact sports like that, I feel good again, and I'm like loading up the squat rack, and I'm like, man, I missed out an entire year of like solid leg training because I was battling these injuries. And so it's just like, maybe you've had your own injuries, maybe you haven't. Just like, heed our advice on this stuff. Like, not train hard, but train smart. And
always, I think, that's the biggest thing. Is like, just train smart.
Have a progression.
Yeah, no, if you want to do something different, that's fine. Just start from the bottom. Yeah. Do it long enough that you're actually getting better at it to get the benefits. Train smart.
Train smart, because the downside of all that variation is you do something you just don't have the kinesthetic awareness about, and you just fuck up and hurt yourself, and you're just like out, and there goes all your momentum, and
you just don't get as far either. And
or
you put in all that effort and work, and you could have progressed so much farther if you just got a little simpler.
So in the grand scheme of fitness, consistency is king, turns out. And so so that's always your North Star. All right, that was episode 50.
Big 50
of podcast formerly called Coach's Corner with Justin Ethan. Now, in the grand scheme of fitness, we will see you guys next week for another episode. Check y'all later. Bye-bye.
Peace.